Hey everybody, I'm Terry, and today we're tackling the rear brakes on the BMW Z3. Alright, welcome back to the channel everybody. Now from the previous video, we went ahead and we did the front brakes on the Z3. This time around, we're going to do the rear brakes. These ones are going to be different from the front because they're going to have the parking brake shoes involved. So let's go ahead and get the tire removed so I can show you what we got going on. Alright, so in case you didn't watch the first video, you need a 17 millimeter to remove the lug bolts from the wheels. There, we got it. Now it's always good to kind of just set your tire underneath the car in case your jack stands or whatever fail. And then another thing I like to do is I will just throw the bolts right back into the wheel. This way I'm not kicking them around or losing them. I'll know they're with the wheel. Alright, so here you can see the condition of the rear rotor. We'll have to break this screw loose here. You're going to want to make sure you break this loose first while you still have brakes attached, because you can set the rear parking brake or your emergency brake to lock this up so it won't turn, so you can get this out before you take these pads off. Okay, if you have an electric ratchet or whatever, you should be able to zip it out without having to worry about it spinning the rotor. Just like that. Now keep the brake on so you can loosen all of the fasteners and everything. And then once you get the caliper off, we'll have to release the emergency brake, the parking brake, so that way we can then get the rotor off. Because if you keep the parking brake on, when you get to the rotor, the shoes, your brake shoes are going to be pressing up against the rotor and locking it on. So you want to make sure you don't forget to release the brake when you're ready to remove the rotor. So now that we got that off, we can move on to focusing on the caliper. We're also going to be replacing the sensor on here as well. But let's go ahead and get everything detached from over here. It's probably going to be too hard to pull that off, so I might wait until I get the caliper taken off, because that's going to be seized down with a lot of dirt. Go ahead and remove your protective cap from the bleeder screw so you can pull that wire out. That way, as we loosen this, we'll have some slack on here, and then we can get that attached. So we're going to want to focus on popping off these rear caps, just like we did on the front brakes. So pretty much everything is going to be the same as the front until we get the rotor removed. One cap, and then get the lower one, like that. Let's go ahead and remove the clip in the front. This way the caliper itself won't be moving around. There we go. Now we can go back to get those slide pins out. Now I'm going to use a breaker bar just to loosen them, and then I'll zip them on out. There's one, and there's two. These don't get overly tightened, so they're not going to be as hard to remove as it will be the actual bolts that hold the bracket on are always the tightest. Remove that pin. And now that pin is out. So I always use a small little pry bar to kind of start coaxing it away. Little on top, little on bottom, and just keep working it until it wants to come off. And it looks like these are coming off easier than the fronts did. Just like so. All right. Now, it'll make it a little easier to kind of get this unhooked. So I'm going to try to pull the pad out and get this cable to let go. Sometimes it gets stuck, so again, pry bar and take it to the sensor itself. You can see how it kind of clips into the brake pad. Just try to pry it off the pad a little bit. They get stuck from being on for so long. Got it. And then just pull it off. Just like so. Alright, and then you can pull the pad out if you want. And then what we're going to do is just hang this off to the side so that it's out of the way and we're not going to damage anything. So hook it up to a bungee strap, and I tend to just go off of the spring. Okay, just like that, so that it's hanging without putting tension on the brake line. You don't want stretching it out. Alright, now we can go ahead and get the fasteners for the caliper bracket off. So go ahead and add some penetrant, because these things are going to probably need some force to come off. You're going to need a 16 millimeter to get these off. Now I'm going to use a regular wrench and hammer it, because that's easier for me to do it that way than to use a breaker bar or anything like that, just because of the lack of leverage. Get it real good and saturated, and now I'm going to let it kind of soak in for a little moment. I also relocated the caliper and I have it resting on top of the rotor. This way it's out of the way and I can work right here without it being in the way. I gotta pound it up to loosen. Just enough to where I break it loose, and then I'll use my power tools. And right off, no problems. And then you just pull those two bolts out, and we'll set those aside because we will reuse those. And now we have the caliper bracket removed, and we'll be cleaning this up here in a little while to put this back on. So now that we're at this point, go ahead and we're going to move the caliper behind here once again. Now we're going to release the parking brake so we can get the rotor off. Now the rear rotors usually will need a little bit of persuasion. You're not going to be able to just pull it off, as you can see. So we're going to go ahead and give it some love taps to try to break it free. Again, make sure the parking brake has been released. Give it some love taps, and it'll come right off. My method of choice is a 3-pound little Deadblow hammer. It makes the job really easy. You want to have the right kind of hammer, otherwise it's going to take a lot more effort to bang these off. But now we can get rid of this old rotor. Alright, so now we can dispose of the old rotor. This is what it's going to look like behind the rotor. You're going to have your parking brake shoes. In here, you got your adjuster right there. This is what's going to adjust the shoes itself, so you can make sure you have the right amount of contact within the rotor. And you got your springs, the one spring on top, and there's going to be another spring down on the bottom here to hold the shoes in place. And there's also going to be one on the side and on this side here holding them in as well. And then on the very bottom, this here is what your parking brake cable is attached to. So it'll be attached here, and then it'll feed out the back and work its way up to where the parking brake handle will be. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take all this stuff out. So let's go ahead and do so. And we're going to kind of spray everything down, kind of clean it up, make it a little easier to take apart. And then we're going to adjust this to loosen it up to make it easier to get the parking shoes removed. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just hit with some brake cleaner. That way I'll be able to hopefully make this adjuster move without it being kind of jammed up with grime. Now, if you still have your rotor on, you would use the bolt hole for the wheel to put a screwdriver through to make your adjustments. If you needed to make an adjustment for your emergency brake or your parking brake, that's how you would do it. If it wasn't catching enough or if it was catching too much, you can adjust it that way. I'm just going to spin this to pull these in so that they'll be nice and loose. Alright, those will be nice and loose. Now I want to do these here on each side first, and then I'll start popping everything else out. This stuff will probably just fall out on its own, honestly, once I take these out. Alright, so you're going to need, I believe, a size 5 hex to get this out. If you have a standard set, I believe it's a 5/16, which is what I'm going to be using, because you can't really fit a socket in here. So I'm going to go straight through here, put it in, and then you can loosen this up, and it'll just pop right out like so. And then move the hub and repeat it on the other one. Stick it in and rotate it and pop that spring right out. Easy does it. Alright, let me see if maybe I can get the spring that's on the bottom first. Okay, I was able to pop it enough. Maybe now I can get my pliers on there, my needle nose. There we go. And now that spring is released. Now I can just kind of pull it off all in one piece. Just like that, so you won't have to take everything off. You just remove the bottom spring, then you can just take the whole thing off as one unit. We're going to be replacing all these springs, so we don't have to take it apart. And this way you'll have a reference how everything goes back together on the new one. So we're going to hit this with some brake cleaner and stuff so we can make sure that the new parking shoes and everything will sit in here nice. Give it a good clean. Alright, and then we're also going to want to make sure we clean this off as well, so when we put the rotor on, things aren't going to stick on here. Alright, so I got the Powerstop brake shoes. So I went ahead and I got these pulled out, so they're going to be in this orientation because that matches the originals, because you can see how this spring has more of like a triangular notch it goes in versus circles for the bottom. So that's how I'm going to match it up. So I have more of the triangles on top and circles on the bottom. So that way I know that's right. Okay, and then I got some Raybestos hardware, so we can put all new springs in there. Now whenever you do your rear brakes, you don't have to replace the brake shoes every time. It'll just depend on the condition of the brake shoes. However, you will need, it is always recommended to replace the springs every brake change, because these get stretched out and they start to lose tension, And it's just better to always put fresh new springs on. It's a common thing where people won't do that, and it's actually recommended to at least always replace the springs to ensure proper fitment, that these don't get too stretched out. Now the kit has enough parts to do both sides, and this kit is specifically this part number right here, and this one has everything you need that will fit the Z3. So I still have more in here to go to the other side of the car. So I got the upper spring, the lower spring, I got the adjuster, and then I got the two little fasteners that hold the shoes to the dust plate. So we'll go ahead and get all this kind of put together. And when you put your adjuster together, you want to put a little bit of anti-seize in here just to make sure that it doesn't like rust up. So that way if you ever need to make adjustments in the future, it won't be seized and you'll be able to still make the adjustments. So this is like the only time on hardware for brakes you'll use anti-seize, because normally you don't want anti-seize on any hardware because you don't want things loosening. But this is a case where you kind of want it because you don't want this stuff to freeze up. So we're going to put a little anti-seize on this when we put it together. And you can see on the original which way it was connected. So we're going to want, so it'll be like, so you have this piece will be connected here, right? The actual adjusting screw will then go through the little crank wheel here. I can get it to go in there. I'll have to screw it through. So we're going to screw that all the way in, and then that's going to go in on here, and it will attach just like that. We're going to put the anti-seize right on the screw part. Put this together. Like that, and then this will go into this tube like so, and then you just fit it together just like so, and that's how that is going to sit on your new shoes, just like that. And then you would put this spring in, and then this spring goes down here, and then these will then go in the middle on each side to hold it in place. So let's go ahead and get it kind of attached so we can get those springs in place. The one shoe will sit right in here, and we got to put this through and then twist it. Yep, it's not going through the dust shield anymore, so I gotta, okay, now it's going through, and twist it. And then what you can do is from the rear, this is what I did, is I was looking behind it at the same time, because right in here is where you'll see it come through. So you know you're in the hole, and then you can just twist it to lock it in place. Before I get ahead of myself, before I put the second shoe in, I want to make sure that the parking brake cable is getting connected, and there's kind of a groove. This is technically the bottom. There's a groove right here on each side of the shoes that needs to clip in to this. So I got one shoe already locked in place, so I'm going to try to get this to go on so that way I can then set it on the other one before I lock them in. Okay, so that's attached to the one shoe, and then it needs to attach to this shoe, and it would sit together kind of like that, and that spring is what's going to put everything together. So at least this way it's held in. So now I got to put the fastener that holds it in place in, but this is sitting where it needs to sit. Alright, so I went ahead and slipped the adjuster into place, the parking shoe part into place, and then I locked in the shoe itself. Now we got to get the bottom spring in place, and then we'll have to make adjustments on the adjuster itself to kind of spread these out a little bit. And then we'll get the final adjustments once the rotor is on to make sure we're good. Okay, so we're going to try to get this spring to go into its place, and it goes into the two circular holes on each side. Like, it needs to go all the way through and hook in, and I'm not getting it to hook around on there proper. There we go. Now that one's in. Had to give it a little bit more force, but it's attached on this side. So now comes the fun part of stretching it to go in on this other side. Oh, come on. Okay. This spring is going to be much more difficult than the other spring, let me tell you. Alright, I'm going to have to wrestle with it, but you want to stretch it and get it into that hole right there. That's the goal anyway. Alright, it took a lot of muscle, but I managed to stretch that blasted spring into place. So now that is in, everything is back in where it's supposed to be. The parking shoes are done. And just to kind of give you a reference, so like here's the originals. So like the tops and the bottom are completely gone. The top and bottom are completely rubbed away. So that's like, if you look at the distance between how far that rubbed, so that's like a good maybe ½ inch of this part completely gone, and then it goes back to the brake material again, and it's like that on the upper and lower. So it looks like the parking brake was only making contact up here and on the bottom instead of pushing the whole shoe out. It looks like the contact of it was being a little weird, but well, we got new ones in now, so I don't have to worry about that. Let me go ahead now, and we're going to get the hub cleaned off a little bit, and we'll put some anti-seize on, and then we'll put the new rotor in, so that way we don't have to worry about it getting stuck. Alright, just take like a wire brush and just kind of go at it. Make sure you have like a mask on. You don't want to breathe in any of this stuff. And I want to make sure I go around the lip here, because that's the part that's going to be making contact the most when it comes to the holding the wheel on. Alright, and once you give it a good brush, we'll hit it with some brake clean. Get my drain pan to catch the mess. Now remember, we're going to have to adjust this to tighten things up, so that way it holds the rotor. You want it to have a little bit of, when you go to move it, you want to hear a little bit of resistance, a little bit of drag, but you don't want it to be so tight to where you can't spin the wheel or spin the rotor with the parking brake off. Because right now the parking brake is off, so it shouldn't be holding it in place once the rotor's on. And then we'll just go in with a screwdriver, and we'll just make the adjustments on here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start adjusting it now while it's open, because it'll be easier to move it, and we'll get it kind of tightened. to kind of get started. And the darn thing don't want to spin either direction here. Yeah, it won't turn at all. That is ridiculous. It is completely stuck. Alright, so yeah, the new one is completely seized together. It will not unscrew, so I am tired of wasting my time fighting with it. So I'm just going to reuse the old one, because this one I can still screw. So I don't know, that one broke. So we'll just reuse this one so we can get this done. That's bizarre. I can't believe that happened. Like, that's the last thing I would expect would happen, is the brand new adjuster with anti-seize put on it, seized up. It's defying all logic, but it happened, so whatevers. Will it adjust? Okay, we can spin it both directions. That's what we're looking for. We want to be able to spin it. So yeah, I don't know why the other one seized up, but we're able to spin this again, so we're back in business. We can adjust it more if we need to, but that'll just give it a good start to where this will be nice and tight. So now that we got that semi together, we'll put a little anti-seize on here to protect how the rotor sits on, because we don't want that to up and get stuck, like it, because you have to use the hammer to get it off. It's a pain. I mean, depending on how long this ends up being on before you change them again, the anti-seize will eventually wear away from moisture and stuff, but at least if you need to get it off in the near future, it'll be easy to get off. Now copper anti-seize is better because it's for higher temperatures, but I don't have any copper. I reused the last of it on the front. Just make sure you don't get any inside the thread area. Alright, now we can go ahead and we'll put the new rotor on. Okay, we got the new rotor. You're going to want to make sure you clean the inside out, because that's the part that the parking brake makes contact with. So you want to make sure that's good and clean. And then we'll get the rear nice and clean. Alright, so we're going to want to go ahead and get this up on there and make sure you have the correct hole that goes to where the screw goes in lined up right. Alright, we're going to go ahead and screw it in, and then we can make adjustments on the parking shoes to get it to where we just have a light drag to it. Alright, so now that holds it in place. So I can feel the drag on it right now. It's a light drag. Now we can make that a little bit more. We want to make sure we can still turn it, but we want drag. So I need a little bit more on there. But you'll just keep adjusting it until you get it about to where it feels about right. Okay, that feels like some good drag. I'm getting this thing plenty dirty from my hands. Okay, next, before we start focusing on the caliper, let's go ahead and get this sensor replaced. It's going to be pretty much the same as the front, only with easier access. Let me get my lighting on so you guys can see. So it just kind of wraps through these different clips here, and it plugs in right back here on the rear trailing arm. Significantly easier to get access to. You don't have to worry about opening up like a little door area or anything like that. So we're going to go ahead and get this taken out and get the new one put in. Just kind of follow all the little clip areas where it plugs in and just pull it out. Alright, they kind of had that twisted around, but go ahead and get that undone, and then you can kind of pull it out of its little harness right here. Just like that. And then we just got to unplug it. So on here, as long as yours doesn't break, you push in this little tab here, and then once you push that in, you should be able to just pull this part apart. Well, my little release button is kind of twisting a certain way that it's not going to be beneficial to me, but there it goes. And then that comes apart just like that. So yeah, the little depress button's kind of broken, but it came apart. Okay, so now we want to make sure we're plugging it in the right way. There's kind of like, you're probably not going to be able to see inside here, but a little bit. So inside there, you're going to see the two little prongs that are in there. You want to make sure the orientation of those prongs matches the orientation of the plug right here. See how it's got like kind of like that skull? You want to match it up before you plug it in together. Mine will go together just like this. And then you just press it together so it's good and firm. Make sure it won't pull back out on its own. Okay. Then you go ahead and just put it back in its little storage area here. Just like that. And start feeding the wire back to all of the little clips that it has. Got that one, and then there's another one down here, and then there's one at the back of where the rotor is. Alright, and now that is all back together, and that's for sure snapped in. Alright, the new sensor is attached. Perfection. Now we can move on to getting the calipers put together. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get the bracket cleaned up. We're going to need to get the area that the brake pads rest nice and clean, so that way the pads can slide on it properly and not get seized up. And then my drill piece won't fit in between here, so I'll do this by hand. Go ahead and get that good and clean. And then once you're satisfied with it, we'll go ahead and remount it to the rotor itself. Apologies, my mic was turned off for this segment, so I'm going to do a quick voiceover. You're just going to reattach the bracket. I went ahead and I cleaned the bolts off, and I added some blue thread locker to these caliper bracket bolts, and you're just going to insert these and screw them in so that way everything is finger tight. So I went ahead and I got both of them in, and I'm just making sure that they are finger tight and ready to be torqued down. Okay, once you get the rear caliper bracket bolts put in, I got them nice and snug. Now I'm going to go ahead and torque them down to 50 pound-feet. All right. Okay, before I can compress the rear caliper pistons in, I do have an issue. So my master cylinder is overflowing with fluid, and it overflowed when I was compressing the pistons on the front too. So that tells me that whoever serviced this vehicle before I had it, they must have topped it off at some point. So they ended up putting too much fluid in there. So I need to try to siphon some of it out so I can compress the rear pistons. Otherwise, I'm going to have fluid pouring everywhere. So mine has a protective screen in there that's kind of difficult to get out. But in order for me to siphon that out, I got to get that blasted screen out. So I'm going to see if I can get this to come out. Otherwise, I'd have to try to bleed the brakes to get this fluid out, which is possible. It's just that's going to be a lot more tedious to do. Having to push the pedal like 50 times just to get enough of this fluid out of here. So let's see if I can't just pull that out with some pliers. And then any tools that come in contact with the brake fluid, I'll have to thoroughly clean because that brake fluid will corrode my metal. Got it. Darn screen. All right, now I gotta get all of the brake fluid that I splashed. So I had some touch my wiper up there, so I'm gonna get some soapy water to clean that because that's metal and that will rust. And some on my booster. Okay, my vat. All right, let me go ahead and clean this up so it don't have any reactions with the screen. But yeah, you'll have to remove the screen if you need to siphon anything out. All right, now I'm gonna use a fluid extractor. All right, so that removes a good amount of fluid. Let me get some more out of there because I got to compress both pistons. And I just want to make sure that I'm not going to overflow while I'm doing that since I definitely had too much fluid in here. I'm going to be doing a brake flush anyway, so I don't mind. I'm just going to put the cover loosely on top. That's just to keep debris from falling in there. And then in case it does still overflow, I'll have some rigs around here to kind of keep it from getting onto my metal. All right, so to compress the piston, you're just going to want to put an old brake pad back on there. And then just get yourself a little caliper compression tool like this to kind of push it in. My bungee cord's in the way, so let me remove that real quick. There we go. And then we just twist this. And then this will tighten, and as it tightens, it'll press the pad into the piston, which will then press the piston back in. Alright, and then we loosen it, and that part is done. Let me just reconnect everything so it don't hang too much. Alright, so now I'm going to put a little bit of brake lubricant on the brackets. That's to help the pads slide around a little bit, and it'll help reduce the corrosion from getting built back in here. And then just make sure you wipe it so that way you don't get any on the actual rotor. Alright, now make sure you remember that you're going to have one that has the clip on the back. That's the one that attaches to the caliper piston. And then you'll have the other one. So this one is going to rest in here just like this. Alright, and then we'll put this one into the caliper piston and press it into place. It's being stubborn. It doesn't want to snap in like it's supposed to. Alright, I might need to kind of pry one of them in because it's being stubborn. Okay, so I ended up getting it in. What I had to do was, here's the other one. The bracket was out too far, so I took my pliers and I just kind of bent. I grabbed them and I just kind of squeezed them in a little bit until I was able to press it in. It still was a tight fit pressing in, but I was able to get them close enough to where I could do it. I didn't want to squeeze it too much to make the clip too small, and then it wouldn't seat in the piston properly. So I was careful about it, but I had to change the width of the clip a little bit to get them to go in. But now it's in and it's locked in. Like, I can't just wiggle it out. See, it's in there. Now we can go ahead and get the caliper in place. That fought me in a way that it shouldn't have. But now we can move on. Alright, and if you want, you can put a little bit of grease on the feet of the pads. And then put it on the side of the ears as well, because that's going to help preventing any squeaking when it rubs up against the pad. And fit everything back into its place. Just like that. And that'll hold there for the moment. We'll go ahead, we'll get the bungee out of there. We can go ahead then and plug the sensor in so we don't forget about it. I'll actually wait. I want to get my new slide pins in first to keep this from falling off. And then these are the part number that I'm using for my slide pins, and it's the Raybestos brand. I bought a bunch of these so that I could replace all the pins on all 4 sides. But we're gonna put some grease on here. Make sure you don't get any by the threads themselves. Just like that, and that one's ready to go in. Slide that in, and then we'll get the other one prepped. Okay. That one's got some grease on it. And that one's slided in. Now we just gotta fasten everything down so that we can see both over the pins here. And as long as we're lined up right, these will screw in. So you wanna make sure we can screw them in. All right, and then the other one. And now those are nicely put in, and we'll make sure they're torqued to spec. All right, and these get torqued down to 23 pound-feet. Okay, and now we just gotta slip our new sensor into place, and it'll walk right into the pad, just like so. And now that's in place. All we gotta do now is re-clean the rotor because I've gotten smudge all over it from my hands. Okay, I went ahead and I put some anti-seize on the outside here so my wheel don't get stuck. And then the last thing is to put the new clip in. So you get the first one kind of pre-started, and then you can force this one over, and then it'll just push in just like that. And then the bracket, your clip will be on there. Easy peasy. And that concludes the rear brakes on the BMW Z3. And there you have it, everybody. That is how you go ahead and you can yourself complete your brake project. I showed you on the previous video how to do front brakes. This video concludes how to do the rear brakes on a BMW Z3, and the process will be similar on an E36 or an E30. So go ahead and do the job yourself, and good luck, and I'll catch you all on the next video, which will be the brake bleed and like the flushing of the fluid. See you then.